Hey guys, Lone here once again, and this time I'm doing the Prismacolor tutorial. Oops, knocking over refills. But I figured I'd go over Prismacolors and how to use them, seeing as YouTube doesn't have a lot of tutorials about Prismacolor markers, as more people prefer the copics. And I'll explain why that is pretty much in the next segment of like an overview of Prismas and why people prefer copics. But these were the first markers I ever learned how to use, and so I still feel kind of attached to them, even though, to be honest with you, I haven't used them in quite a while. So yeah, but I still love them so much, and I'm shaky. But that's okay. But anyway, I hope that you guys enjoy, and hopefully you guys learn something. So I'll see you in the next segment. Okay, so to get some stuff about Prismacolor. So Prismacolor markers come in 152 shades of different colors, or at least 152 markers. That is very few compared to Copic's 358. However, Prismacolor markers come in either a chisel tip, which looks like this, or they come, oops, wrong end. They come with a brush tip like this. Now they did this. They did the brush tips recently, probably within the last couple years, I'm gonna say. But I'm mostly familiar with the chisel tip, as that's what I learned how to use first. But I figured I'd give the brush tips a try as well, just to give you guys a heads up on what they're like. But essentially an overview. So obviously, Prismacolor markers come with 152 colors, different markers, whatever. They obviously have the brush tip series and the chisel tip series, and unlike Copics, where Copics are refillable, you can replace the nibs as need be, and you can, refill the colors and whatnot. Prismacolor markers, as far as I'm aware, are only refillable once, and that is with denatured alcohol. Now, I'm not sure how you would go about taking out the brush tip here to replace the ink. However, if what I've read up on is correct, and if I can get my hands on some denatured alcohol, I'll actually show you guys how to refill these. But you take out the chisel tip, you put in a few cc's of the denatured alcohol, and then you let it sit for a few minutes while the pads inside the Prismacolor marker itself actually absorb that alcohol and redo the pigment. And then you want to, before you start using it on your actual piece, is let it not let it, but test it out. Sorry, I'm having a brain fart. But you want to test it out on like a scrap piece of paper to make sure that all the alcohol was at least absorbed, or at least a good chunk, and to make sure that it's not leaking, because leaky markers can lead to accidents of the not so happy kind. So yeah, one thing I would like to say that is definitely different from Copics and Prismacolors is that, and this is no offense to Prismacolors, but they don't really have a very good purple selection. So, and this is just a recommendation, but I would really recommend actually going out and getting Copics to supplement for the lack of violets that are in the Prismacolor marker collection. I don't know if it's because of the way that they do it, or if apparently purple hues are harder to make with this type of marker, but I don't know. I just know that they don't really have a very good purple collection in their markers. Also, I would recommend these as a good beginner tool, especially the brush tip, if you want to try your hand at Copics later on. Just from what I feel, and this is just me kind of playing with the tip itself, they're a little stiffer than Copics brush tips, but I think that would allow you more control. We'll see how it goes while I'm coloring this. But if you want to see how Copics kind of work, but you don't want to spend the money, I would recommend getting these. Also, for those that are kind of interested in checking out Prismacolor Markers, I would really recommend going online and not going to Michael's. When I first got my set back in 2008, I paid almost, I think it was either $250 or $350 for just a 48 set. And that's from Michael's. That's before I found out about online shopping. So obviously they were ripping me off. But if you want to get some of these individually, make sure that you don't pay more than, I'm going to say, about $3 per marker, because that just means that they're ripping you off. I'm looking at you, Michael's. Seriously, they charge $4.99 per marker. So if you have to go to Michael's and have no other alternative, make sure you have a coupon to save you guys a little bit of bucks. So let's get this thing started, shall we? So here we go with the skin. Woo! Okay, so because I have about 50 some odd markers and not the complete 152, my selection is going to be very, very limited on what I can do. In fact, these are all the markers that I'm going to be using for this tutorial, which will bring out a very contrasting difference. But it's the 48 set plus a few extras here and there. So one thing I would recommend is going ahead and getting your eggshell. Now I have an eggshell in the chisel tip somewhere. I think I actually threw it away, but I had a chisel tip. But we'll try out the brush tip. So I wish I hadn't run out of eggshell, but I did. But anyway, so I'll go ahead and start placing down the eggshell. And one thing that's different as well with Copic and Prismacolor markers is that, yes, they do number their markers, but there really is no order to what they put down. But just from what I can tell, just from this, and I'm kind of going in circles with this. With the chisel tip, you would want to go more in an up and down motion without actually lifting up the pen, but I will actually show that probably in the hair tutorial, because I don't believe I picked up any new markers for that. But if you want to try out the brush tip, like with Copics, I would really recommend kind of going in circles. And even if you decide to get the 48 set, which is what I started out with, I would really recommend not using the Colorless Blender. And I'll tell you why. Their color, instead of like Copic, where Copic and their Colorless Blender can actually kind of work with the markers, Prismacolor's Colorless Blender was actually more designed for the for colored pencil use to go alongside their markers. So if you have some Prismacolor markers and you want a way to be able to blend it with your marker or colored pencils with your markers, I would recommend going out and using that Prismacolor Colorless Blender that comes with the 48 set. But otherwise, I would say leave it alone and get yourself a Copic Colorless Blender, because not only do they not push the marker in, but say you make a big mistake, it tends to leave the marker that is left behind very splotchy looking, which is not something that you want. So yeah, just a bit of advice. If you decide to go out and get a larger set or some kind of set, if you end up getting the 48 set, I would really recommend going ahead and getting some other colors that can go along with them, including eggshell, maybe some brick beige. I think that's actually included, if I remember correctly, in the 48 set. But go out and get some more skin tones. That way you have a bit more variety, because, and that's because they're not bad with their skin tones, but they essentially cater more to Caucasian. So yeah, so let me speed this up and finish out this part, and then I will actually show you guys how to use the chisel tips to shade this. So be back in a second. Okay, so my base color is finally laid down. Didn't take too long, but I will say that the nib for the brush tip here is a little stiffer, so even though it might not be as flexible, you can still have a little bit more control than you would probably have with Copics, but that's just my own personal opinion. Now, on to the Chisel Tip. Now, for shading, this shading is going to be slightly different because I'm not so extreme with all of my shading. So, and I tend to stick with earthy tones with Prismacolor. So I'm going to start off with the Brick Beige. And with the Brick Beige, obviously you see the Chisel Tip. Now this Chisel Tip right here can allow you to have 4 different points. Now, you can have a slim, even finer than their fine end point, or a wide and a slightly thicker than the fine tip, or around the fine tip point that they have on the other end, or a medium area of coverage. So you want to be able to make sure that you don't twist it around, because the more you twist it around, the less likely you are going to be able to control essentially what your stroke is going to look like. So you're going to have to make sure it stays at whatever angle you want it to be at. And unlike a Copic, you don't have that brush tip to put forth any kind of gradient effects. So you gotta be kind of careful. So with the Chisel Tip here, I'm gonna go ahead and put down some color. Now make sure you don't move it. So I've got it set to where it's kind of fine, because I personally like using the Chisel Tip, and you just kind of want to stroke as well. You want to be careful too, because unlike the Copic, you don't get that awesome gradient, but don't really have much choice here, do we? That's okay though. I don't think I'm too bad. Just kind of want to stroke down a little bit. Okay. And I'm going to bring this further down on this end. And got to be real careful. And it doesn't help that my marker is somewhat dying out, but that's okay. I've had worse to where it leaves very streaky marks, so it's all good. I'm gonna leave a mark here. I'm gonna leave a mark here underneath the glasses. And as you can see, I'm not moving my hand at all. At least I'm trying not to. And underneath. So there we go. So that is how you essentially lay down the Brick Beige. Once again, make sure you don't move your hand around too much or try to adjust it to ease the pain in your hand, because it will become a bit of a bother. And it takes some getting used to, I will admit that. Like, it took me the longest time to get used to having to keep my hand in with one of the ends sticking out. So it's one of the perks, though, of having a marker that is kind of dying out, I hate to say, but it does tend to help create a gradient. So there is some use to having a marker that is dying out before you refill it. So there is that. Now, now, after that, you want to be able to kind of give it, let's see what we got here. You can use this. You can use our light peach. I'm going to be honest. The light peach isn't bad, but sometimes their light peach can be very, very, very off the color. So I always tend to have a scrap piece of paper here, because as you can see, more than likely, that's what the color actually looks like. This is what it's supposed to look like, what you see on this cap. As you can see, it's slightly lighter. So that is another drawback to using Prismacolors, and why it's always a good thing to have another another piece of paper so you can test it. Now, unlike last time where I used the Chisel Tip, I'm actually going to go ahead and use the fine tip, which is on the other end of every single type of marker they have, including the brush tip. This can give you better control. And also, if it's a really small area, you can use this if you're not quite comfortable using the Chisel Tip. So, yeah, so I'm just going to kind of go over my areas a little bit. Not too terribly much. Just kind of add a little bit of color to it, not too terribly much. And as you can see, like I said, there isn't too much of a gradient with these because of the simple fact of there is really no brush tip unless you get all of the brush tips that are available in their colors. However, I prefer the chisel tip because that is what I grew up using. I just want to add some pink here and there. It'll probably get covered up with my next color, but that's okay. And then, boom. Now, normally, a lot of people just either stick to the chisel tip or the fine tip. I go to both, so meh. The next color I'm going to use then is light tan. So, and once again, it's going to be in the fine tip because I actually don't know if I needed to replace this marker or not, but I don't think I did, but who knows? So, with this, you just want to go, like with the purple, your darkest areas, and I'm not even joking. You're going to want to be light on it. So, and you're not going to want to use a lot because once you get it set down, remember that pink I laid down? You're going to need it to kind of spread it out a little bit and to kind of tone it down a bit because I personally find it to be a bit too dark for my liking. So, I just kind of try to get it to blend. It doesn't always work. As you can see, I think I was a little too slow, but that's okay. And then, so I'm going to uncap my light peach because you never know, because I'm about to do some quick stuff with it. And like with the purple, you want to go kind of underneath the chin. With the Prismas, you're going to want to work fast, especially if you want it to blend. There is no space-time. There is no way to kind of cover it up. Because, well, let's be honest. They don't work like Prismas do. Or not Prismas, but copics do. So, bam. That is how I do the skin coloring in the Prismacolor marker. It's very simple, very easy. I don't even go over it with another color. Even though I probably could. I could probably go over it with the Eggshell. I'm going to leave it as is, like I normally do. So, or at least like I normally would with the Prismacolor, or with Prismacolor, because to be honest, the Prismacolor markers are very, very saturated in their color. And if you put another layer on top, there will be a definite difference. No matter how much you try to cover it up, there will be a difference. So, and it's going to be a stark difference compared to the base color. So I leave it as is. So, I'm going to go ahead and move on to the next portion, which, if you guys remember, was the hair. So, I'll see you guys in a minute. Okay. Okay, so they actually do have a very good selection of browns, especially browner colors or brown colors in their marker selection. However, remember, always test this stuff out because you never know. So I'm going to move my skin colors aside because I'm done with them and I don't think I'll be needing them at any point because I already know how the light tan looks. Remember, test it out. You're going to want to because you need to know what your other colors look like. You also need to see what exactly is the darkest shade because, as you can tell, Copic likes, or not Copic, Prismacolor likes to lie. At least their sleeves do. Now these are kind of beat up. They're kind of old. I've had them since 2008. So they've been used and they've been loved. So yeah. So like with the Copics, I'm actually going to go ahead and put in the streaks. But this time, instead of using the chisel tip, I'm going to stick with the fine because I want fine streaks through her hair. And instead of flicking, I'm actually going to go ahead and just kind of bring it up. So, Yeah. With fresh markers, you won't need to worry about going over it, but because mine have been used for so long and are so loved, they kind of do need that. So, like before, I go up and try to be very careful with your flicking because these nibs do not move at all. No joke. They don't give much for headway or leeway when it comes to trying to do flicking, so it makes them a little harder to actually make a very good strand line series thing. Sorry, I'm thinking as I'm doing this, like with the last tutorial, I think and then I look back and then I change it as need be. Now, remember about that the bleed space. So, as you can see, I'm kind of avoiding near the tip because I've already gotten that. Because if you're not careful, these will tend to bleed through whatever you used as your point. So, and this is my darkest shade. So, woo! Good times. So I'm going to go ahead and finish this up, and when I come back, I'll start on the next part. Okay, so I am back, and as you can see, finished up the darker parts of the hair. And this is where I bring out the chisel nib once again. And this time, I'm going to use the Sierra Brown. It's a little hard to read on here, but that's because they're so old and so loved. So here we go. So, like with the copics, you want to kind of flick it to the best of your ability because unlike copics, they don't give leeway. So you definitely have to have a little bit more control in your wrist than what you could kind of play around with copics. And also, as you guys probably know or notice, I'm kind of going over my darker areas with it because, as you can see, unlike copics where, yes, you can kind of get away with using a slightly darker color or a slightly lighter color with the darker color, it doesn't quite do that, or it isn't quite like that with the Prismas. They will take on some of the color of the marker that you're laying down. So, and this I'm trying to work fast because I'm kind of noticing that this is drying out just a bit. And if you need to, adjust it like I just did to get a finer point so you can get a little bit of white space that was left behind as you're putting colors down, you're more than, welcome to do that. It's just make sure that you remember which side your color or your nib was facing whenever you're putting down the majority of the color. That way you don't have an unfortunate accident. Because that would kind of suck. So I will be back hopefully in a minute once the stuff has been laid down. Woohoo! Okay, now that that color has been laid down, I'm gonna go ahead and, like with the deepest shadow of the hair, I'm actually going to use the light tan, which is the lightest color of brown that I actually have. And once again, with the chisel tip, you're gonna want to cover the entire thing. So, good times. And I would really recommend not moving it up and down. It's just I'm so used to Copics. It's like, but if you want even coverage, make sure you don't actually lift up your pen. And like before, you're going to want to cover everything with it because it will kind of adjust and it will not look as good as it does with the Copics. Oh, I'm so used to using Copics. So anyway, I will be right back once I finish this part, so back in a minute. Okay, so there is the hair now, and I colored in the eyebrows. I forgot to record that part, but I colored in the eyebrows with, once again, the darkest brown I had here. And as you can kind of see from what's peeking up over here, this is looking drastically different. So as you can probably tell at this point, like I said, the colors are definitely much more saturated. And like I said before, you don't get as much of a variety. Also, and I don't know if you noticed, but they're a little harder to blend, especially hair-wise, when putting down colors. So this is, in a way, more like a cell-shaded style, or definitely, it's, to me anyway, with the chisel tips especially, it caters more to those that like the cell-shaded style. But then again, that's just my opinion. As you can probably also tell, it's a little harder to control. Granted, I'm a little rusty. It's been about a year or two since I've last used my Prismas, but I don't think I'm doing too bad. So, we're going to go ahead and, like the last tutorial, we're going to start on the eyes. So, here we go. Okay. So, I'm going to start on the eyes, and for the eyes, I'm actually going to kind of stick with this Deco Rose Blush Pink, and even though I'm probably going to regret it, we're going to use the violet for the center of her eyes. Now, like I said before, when working with the Prismacolors, you're probably going to want to go out and get some violet colors. Not a whole lot, but you're going to want to go out and get some Copic violet colors because, like I was saying before, Prismacolors, violets, well, no offense to them, but they kind of suck a lot. So, without further ado, we're going to go ahead, and once again, I'm back to the brush tip. This is how you can tell a brush tip from a chisel tip, because they have this nifty little thing on the side, which tells you where the brush tip is, or at least I think it is. Yeah, where the brush tip is. And then this straight little line right here on this side actually tells you where the fine point is. And like Copics, they have the number, at least the number on top. They don't have the name, but they have the number. So if you can memorize them, you can kind of memorize where your markers are. And unlike Copics, it's not really organized. So anyway, back to what I was doing. We're going to go ahead and we're going to go and put down the Deco Pink. So, woo, this is like really awkward. Go ahead and get these colored in. I'm not used to the brush tip. So there we go. The Deco Pink is put in. And then once again, you're going to want to bring out your blush pink. And this is where it kind of helps to have a fine point compared to the Copics, because I won't have to stop breathing. But I am going to put down the colors. Like last time, up around the sides. And around the top part to where you can form the black part of the eye. And then remember, this is all stylistic choices. In no way, shape, or form am I being endorsed by Prisma. As you can kind of tell, it's a little harder to get it compared to Copics. So once that is done, I'm actually going to go ahead and use the fine point once again for the violet. This is kind of why I like the fine point compared to Copics, because I don't have to stop breathing because I have better control in that aspect, or in this aspect, compared to Copics. So there we go. So I'm going to let that dry for a little bit, for a minute. And like before, I'm actually going to go back over it with the Deco Pink to kind of lighten up this violet maybe a little bit. Maybe probably a whole bunch. Be careful because as you can kind of see, it is smudging a bit. But it also creates a nifty kind of watercolor effect, as you guys can probably see. And while I'm thinking about it, I'm going to retouch this up here because I don't want that. So, back to this. I always tend to go around the edge first. As you can see, it's kind of bleeding out the purple. And then I'm going to go back over the purple just to kind of give it a bit of a pinkish hue. Just looks more blind than anything. But there you go for that. And then like before, let me see if I can hunt down my jelly roll pen. You want to add your little white parts. Hey, somebody's messaging me or something. I don't know. And yes, that is Attack on Titan. Hopefully this doesn't get copyright flagged. I don't know. I should have silenced it. Okay, ignoring that. And this is what I was talking about, if you can see that. I don't know if you guys can, but it's actually absorbing some of the color that was laid down. So this is kind of why I like Prismas compared to Copics, because it tends to absorb it faster. And like before with the white part of the eye, I'm going to go ahead and take Cloud Blue. And with the fine tip, because I have a little better control with it compared to the Chisel Tip, I'm going to go ahead and kind of just put some shadow down here, some shadow down here, some shadow here, and add the shadow. And if need be, because of it being absorbed so fast, I'm going to go ahead and actually supply it with another round of the white jelly roll pen, so that kind of sticks out a little bit more. I'm going to actually take some of the stuff off. Sorry. But it won't get rid of it completely, but as you can see, it is absorbing, and this is what I was talking about in my Copic tutorial, is that it does absorb some of the color. Granted, the same thing happens with Copics, but it takes a little longer. But this is almost immediate, and personally, I like that effect. So, yeah. So, oh, and the glasses, because while her glasses are shaded purple, I don't have a light purple. So we're going to go with the head and use the Deco Pink. And kind of go over it. And because the Cloud 9 being a bit of a gray tone, as you guys can kind of see, it's like a gray bluish tone. I'm going to go ahead and color in the middle part of her glasses with that same shade that I used to color the eyes. And then, because I'm a sucker for the mouth, woo, and as you can see, Prismacolors like to roll everywhere, so be warned. So there we go. All that is done, so I'm going to go ahead and do the scarf next. This ought to be real fun. Okay, so now that I'm back, I'm actually going to go ahead and I'm going to use, because the violets suck, this is what limits me, guys, the violet is the one that, like, ugh, so bad in comparison. I am going to use just these two colors and the white of the paper in order to make this work. So this ought to be interesting. So I'm going to go ahead and color down the base with these two brush tips. Obviously, you don't need to, you know, refer too much to this because I'm just going to speed it up because it's going to take a while. So I'll be back once I lay down my base colors. Okay. Now, I don't like using the white of the paper, but because, and this is no offense to Copic, or to Prismacolor, sorry, but y'all need to work on your purples. So, like before, I'm going to use another color to kind of shade this. And once again, I'm going to go ahead and use the Cloud Blue. So, here we go. I'll be right back, hopefully. So, there we go. The scarf is done, and if you guys noticed, I actually stopped using the broad chisel tip and swapped over to the fine tip, and that's because, especially for shading something this small, the fine tip gives a little bit more control, especially when you're trying to shade, compared to, say, the chisel tip, unless you're really accustomed to it, and because I'm a little rusty, meh. So, with that out of the way, I'm going to start on the headphones. Dun dun dun. Okay, so for the headphones, I'm going to be using the two brush tips, Deco Pink and Deco Blue, with the chisel tip of Process Red and Cloud Blue as my shade. So, like before, I'm going to speed this up just because it'll take way too long, and I don't want this video to be crazy long like before, but remember, you want to use your chisel nib. I'm just going to quickly do this. Remember, don't move your chisel nib. Don't move it too much in your hand. And yes, this is probably why I got carpal tunnel. No, not really. I don't think I actually got carpal tunnel. See what I mean by it being really bright and saturated, especially compared to the bottle? It's on the outside. It's really dark. I forgot just how dark this could be. Remember how I said fine? This point could actually get you finer than the fine point? This is a good example before I messed up on the other side. Because I moved a pen in my hand. So there we go for that. I'm going to speed the... you know what? Screw it. And use this. And then we're going to top it off just to try to make a purple. Because, like I said, they kind of suck with the purple thing. I'm going to cover it up with some deco blue. I probably should have gone the other way around, but that's okay. Yes, I should have. That's okay. So that's what I do. Go back over it with the deco pink. Try to make it work. And I'm failing, but that's okay. I wonder if I can use the blush pink. Maybe that'll have a better effect. Don't know. We're just experimenting here. So there's that. And we're going to try this again with the more concentrated deco blue tip. Because the brush tip is just not cracking it. Careful not to oversaturate your paper. There we go. That'll work for now. It kind of gets the point. And it actually made a gray color, so meh. Nothing I can really do about that. And then with the cloud, actually, you know what? We'll use the blush pink. And now I'm going to go ahead and shade all of this up with the deco blue. Or the cloud blue. I don't know why I said deco. So there we go. Here is the completed Prismacolor marker version. And to help you guys out to see the differences, here is both versions next to each other. And as you can tell, this is definitely a bit on the darker end, while this is more pastel-y light in comparison. So, yes, granted, it does have something to do with some of the choices that I made, because obviously Prismacolors don't have as many good color choices. But if you want something more to the Copic side of things, I would definitely recommend for anybody who is actually interested in getting Copics but doesn't have the money to spend, to go ahead and get yourself some of these Prismacolor Premier brush tips. They're not too bad. Yes, it is a little different. Yes, they're a little firmer than the Copic brush tips, but I think you would have a better shot at getting something more Copic-esque like in comparison. Also, nostalgia's sake, I can't just say to Prismacolor because obviously they are cheaper. Yes, they are refillable. You can try it more than once, but as far as I was able to research, like I said before, it was only refillable once with the denatured ink. But I hope that you guys learned something, and I will actually show both of these side by side at the end of the video. So let me know what you guys think, and I will be back next week with another video. Yay!